On behalf of Harvard Law School, the Veterans Legal Clinic of the WilmerHale Legal Services Center, the Law School's Armed Forces Association, and Disabled American Veterans, DAV, I'm so very delighted to welcome you all to this year's convening of the DAV Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm Daniel Nagin, Director of the Veterans Legal Clinic at the Legal Services Center, and I'm also going to be joined later in our session by Betsy Guin, who's Associate Director of the clinic, who will moderate our panel discussion. We have just a really terrific, a tremendous lineup of speakers today on the incredibly urgent topic of military burn pits. We're deeply grateful that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a champion for service members and veterans on this issue, is our featured speaker, and will lead things off in just a moment. Before we begin, let me just offer a few notes about our closed captioning option today. Closed captioning is available during today's event. To enable this feature, click on Closed Caption on the bar at the bottom of the webinar window. You can also hide the captions by clicking this button, as indicated on the slide. To change the size of the captions, click the arrow next to Closed Caption and select Subtitle Settings. A new window will open where you can move the slider to increase or decrease the size of the captions on screen. If anyone has any technical issues or concerns during today's discussion, please submit those via the chat. And we're also, of course, going to have time later, we should, for question and answer from our attendees today. And we invite you all to submit any questions throughout the event, and not just at the time of our panel discussion. And to submit questions throughout the event, you can use the Q&A function, not the chat function, but the Q&A function on your screens. We are profoundly indebted to DAV for its sponsorship of this speaker series and for its generous support of and partnership with the Veterans Legal Clinic in so many ways over the years. DAV, with its 1 million strong membership, is an inspiring example of veteran community building and empowerment, and we could not be more honored to collaborate with DAV. Today's event marks the 8th annual convening of the DAV Speaker Series at Harvard Law School. The goal of the series is to bring together important leaders and advocates to shine a spotlight on the unmet needs of veterans and create a platform for both conversation and action. And indeed, the theme of today's discussion and our lineup of esteemed speakers more than fulfills this goal. I'm very pleased to now pass the baton in just a moment to Randy Reese, who will offer opening remarks and introduce our distinguished guest, Senator Gillibrand. Randy is Executive Director of DAV's National Service and Legislative Headquarters. In that role, Randy directs DAV's legislative and service programs and serves as DAV's principal spokesperson before Congress, VA, and the White House. Randy is a combat veteran of the Persian Gulf War. He was a rifle squad leader in the 82nd Airborne Division and later a black hat instructor at Fort Bragg. And Randy is a service-connected disabled veteran and someone who knows these issues better than anyone. I'm pleased to now turn over the proceedings to Randy.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be with you this afternoon, and thanks to Harvard Law School and its Veterans Legal Clinic for organizing today's extremely important and timely event. As a Gulf War veteran who served in the deserts of Iraq amidst burning oil wells, I'm well acquainted with military toxic exposures and the impact it can have on service members and veterans. I also know the challenges they face from more than 25 years at DAV, representing and advocating for veterans harmed by toxic and environmental hazards, whether from radiation, Agent Orange, Persian Gulf Syndrome, or burn pits. Supporting veterans who were exposed to toxic substances is a top policy priority of DAV, and we're pleased to help host today's event to further this discussion. For those unfamiliar with our organization, DAV is a nonprofit charity that provides a lifetime of support for veterans of all generations and their families, helping more than 1 million veterans in positive and life-changing ways each and every year. We provide free rides to medical appointments, connect veterans with meaningful employment opportunities, and directly support VA and veterans across the country through our network of volunteers, 1,200 chapters, 1 million members, and our auxiliary. But DAV is probably best known for free professional assistance we provide veterans and their survivors who are seeking to access federal benefits and healthcare they've earned through their military service. In fact, right now we represent over 1 million veterans, more than any other organization. This commitment to keeping our promise to the men and women who have served led us to Harvard Law School's Veteran Legal Clinic almost a decade ago. Through the DAV's Charitable Service Trust, which grants to nonprofit organizations that work to meet the needs of injured and ill veterans and their families, we've committed almost $3 million to support Harvard Law School's efforts to aid veterans. Not only do Harvard Law students and faculty provide exemplary pro bono legal services for veterans, but this program also educates and inspires future generations of America's finest legal minds on the challenges facing the men and women who serve. Beginning in 2014, Harvard had hosted the Distinguished Speaker Series to bring national leaders to the school to shine a light and inspire action to support these heroes. This year, we chose to focus on burn pits and military toxic exposures, an issue that affects millions of veterans and one that is right now on the forefront of congressional attention, and we hope soon action. That's why I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. Since coming to the Senate in 2009, Senator Gillibrand quickly became the leader on many important national issues, including veterans and toxic exposures. She led and won a long fight to provide permanent health care and compensation to the 9/11 first responders and community survivors who are sick with diseases caused by the toxins at Ground Zero. She was a leader of the successful fight to provide Blue Water Navy Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange full access to VA care and benefits. I proudly recall standing with Senator Gillibrand and other advocates when the legislation was approved in the Senate just a couple years ago. And once again, I am proud, and DAV is proud, to stand with Senator Gillibrand as one of the leaders in the fight to ensure that veterans harmed by burn pits and toxic exposures get all the benefits and health care they've earned and deserve. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Ed, for your excellent introduction, and thank you for standing with me in all these fights. I want to also acknowledge Shane Liermann, Dr. Anthony Szema, and Roy and Rosie Torres. You'll hear from them during the panel. Rosie and Leroy have taken their own personal struggle and created a movement, and I am continually grateful for them and inspired by them. I also want to thank Peter and everyone at Disabled American Veterans for putting this series together, and for all of you and everyone at the Veterans Legal Clinic and everything you do on behalf of veterans, especially when it comes to addressing the plight of those exposed to burn pits. I'm so grateful for the many ways all of you support those you do and those who give so much to our country. Many of you have handled cases helping veterans trying to get treatment for their burn pit related symptoms and health issues, and know firsthand just how many barriers they have to clear to get the care that they've earned. They have to find specialists and workarounds and work for months or years. The fact that they need lawyers at all speaks volumes. We cannot continue to subject our service members and veterans to this kind of treatment. The VA estimates that 3.5 million people were exposed to burn pits around the world, and already more than 290,000 veterans and service members have already added themselves to the burn pits registry. This is a healthcare crisis in the making. It's already started, and it is only going to get bigger. We sent these brave service members on tours of duty that exposed them to dangerous conditions on the battlefield and off. We asked them to live in places around the world where burn pits were used to destroy everything from plastics and electronics to human waste, creating toxic, poisonous air. And we asked them to breathe it in every day. Just because these toxic wounds are hidden, that doesn't mean that we can ignore them. We have the responsibility and obligation to help. This healthcare is the cost of war, and we have to pay it. It's what they are owed. To deny them the care that they have earned is a dereliction of our duty. No one who went to war physically fit and healthy, was exposed to toxic chemicals and burning plastics and electronics, and is now suffering with respiratory health problems or cancer should be denied coverage for the care when the devastation and connection are so clear. But when these veterans and service members return home from battle, they have to enter a new one with the VA. When they ask for the care that they need, they are asked to provide evidence to prove they were exposed to a burn pit and that their ailments were caused by toxic exposure. They are forced to spend years they often don't have, jumping through hoops, doing research, and paying for doctors and biopsies to prove to the VA that their illness is service-related. Then, once these veterans have jumped through all of these hoops, the VA says the science isn't there and denies their claims 8 out of 10 times. The VA continues to claim that there is not enough evidence that many of these ailments are service-connected, but we do have evidence. We know what was burned. We know it was in the soil. We know that the toxic fumes and environmental conditions were so hazardous that burn pits were outlawed on American soil, and the DoD changed the rules for burning and switched to incinerators in many places. We also saw Vietnam veterans develop the same diseases from exposure to many of the exact same toxins. And when our 9/11 first responders were exposed to the same toxins at ground zero as jet fuel burned through metal, plastic, electronics, they breathed in the same fumes and developed the same diseases. It took years to get them the help that they needed. We cannot let history repeat itself. To claim that there is not enough evidence is a disgrace. Anyone who talks to even one of these service members sees the connection as plain as day. In November, I stood with Army veteran Isaiah James, who was exposed to burn pits himself. He used the opportunity to talk about his friend, someone he considered a brother, Staff Sergeant Wesley Black. He was an infantryman in his mid-30s. The day before I met with Isaiah, Sergeant Black went into hospice care for stage 4 colon cancer after being denied the treatment at the VA that would have caught his cancer earlier and might have saved his life. Just a few days after I spoke with Isaiah, Sergeant Black died. He was just 36 years old. This story is far too common. Army veteran Mark Jackson told me about serving at K2, where the ground oozed black goo and standing water changed colors throughout the day. The burn pits there sent black smoke and soot through the air. He said it was like a malevolent snow that clung to their skin, clothes, tents, and lungs. He spoke about his fallen comrades, young men lost to ALS, to heart disease, and glioblastoma in their 30s. You'll hear from Rosie and Leroy about their experience. I've heard too many veterans tell me these stories. I've heard too many widows tell me about spending years researching rare cancers and watching their loved ones fight on 2 fronts, for their lives and for the care they need. Gina Cancelino told me about her husband, Joseph, who was a Marine Corps veteran, an NYPD sergeant, and a dad of 2 girls. In 2017, he developed a very rare, very aggressive form of testicular cancer as well as thyroid cancer. She told me about how he battled. He took every treatment possible, including the last resort of a trial treatment that had only been tried on 3 people. But he lost his war at home in 2019, where she watched him take his very last breath. I think the veterans like Isaiah and Mark and the families like the Cancelinos and the Torreses, when I hear the VA evade the tough questions and evade their responsibilities. I've been working with John Stewart on this issue, and I'm sure many of you saw his interview with VA Secretary Dennis McDonough. There were simple questions and no clear answers. The VA points to making presumptive coverage available for veterans with sinusitis, rhinitis, and asthma, but those aren't the diseases that are killing them. For serious diseases like constructive bronchiolitis and cancers, the VA can't even say what the metrics they are looking for would be. They couldn't point to a budget limit holding them back. There's no answer on how high the bar is that they need to clear. The VA is asking too much and providing too little. The longer we wait for more studies to prove the causation that we already know, the more veterans who will suffer and die. We've seen it before. This is the same battle Vietnam veterans had to fight after being exposed to Agent Orange. Physically fit men and women who were exposed to toxic chemicals returned from the war, came down with rare cancers and ailments, and were told to wait for the science to prove it was related. It took decades of advocacy to provide healthcare coverage to Blue Water Navy veterans also exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. Congress overrode the VA in 1991 and gave Vietnam veterans presumptive coverage for their ailments. We must do the very same for the veterans of the War on Terror. My bill, the Presumptive Benefits for War Fighters Exposed to Burn Pits and Other Toxins Act, will grant to all the veterans who have deployed to fight in war and have now developed cancer or respiratory ailments. To put it simply, it says, if you were there and you are sick, you are covered. This bill applies common sense and common decency to broken promises. No more forcing veterans to beg the DoD for paperwork to prove their exposure, to spend late nights researching the links between lung scarring and the toxic smoke from burn pits, or to get notes from private doctors trying to convince the VA that the disease could only be caused by toxic environmental exposure. All that service members would need to receive care is just as a service medal associated with the global war on terror or the Gulf War. As Congress considers all of our options, I will keep fighting for this legislation and for the broadest possible presumptive coverage. This is not the time for half measures. It is the time for true presumptive coverage for all veterans in those theaters. That's what my bill provides, and it's what our veterans need. We cannot deny or delay this any longer. We have to reckon with the full cost of the last 20 years of war. That includes caring for these veterans. If we can spend trillions of dollars waging war, then we can certainly afford to take care of those who risked everything to fight in it. This bill is coming due, and we cannot let veterans pay with their lives. Our veterans go and serve, and they do so expecting to face risks from our enemies. They should not be expected to face risks from their own operations. And when they do, we have to take care of them. It's that simple. As a senator and as an American, I see this as my moral obligation, and I will not give up on this. I'm very glad to know that there are so many of you out there in this fight with us. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Senator Gillibrand, for your leadership and advocacy on behalf of veterans and military families affected by burn pits. My name is Betsy Guin, and I'm Associate Director of the Veterans Legal Clinic at Harvard Law School, and I'm proud to hold the title as the DAV Charitable Service Trust Fellow. At this point, I'm thrilled to bring in our panel of experts and advocates to continue the conversation with Senator Gillibrand. As noted earlier, you can submit questions for our panelists using the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar. While we have more detailed biographies on our event website for all of our panelists, I want to briefly introduce our esteemed panel. Rosie Torres is the Executive Director of Burn Pits 360 and a military spouse. Her husband, Roy Torres, is co-founder of Burn Pits 360 and a veteran of the Iraq War. Shane Liermann is the Deputy National Legislative Director of Disabled American Veterans and is a veteran of the Marine Corps. And Dr. Anthony M. Szema is a leading research scientist on the health impacts of burn pit exposures. He's a clinical associate professor of medicine at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra, Northwell. Thank you all for being here with us today. Following Senator Gillibrand's remarks, I first want to turn to Leroy and Rosie Torres to hear about your family's story as it relates to burn pits and how you became involved in advocating on these issues. Leroy, I'd like to invite you to start by sharing your story about your military service and your personal experience with burn pits. Leroy?
Hi, good afternoon, Betsy. Thank you, and thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Fellow panelists, it's indeed an honor to be here this afternoon. My personal experience goes back to my deployment to Balad, Iraq from 2007 to 2008, where I lived next to the largest burn pit in theater, which was approximately 10 acres in diameter. Upon returning from war, within 2 weeks, I was in the emergency room. Doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. I was having shortness of breath, chronic cough, unexplained headaches. And eventually, what led to a lung biopsy in 2010, they diagnosed with constrictive bronchiolitis. And in 2018, I was diagnosed with a toxic brain injury, which excuse me, my cognitive has been compromised because of this issue that I didn't find out 10 years later because of these chronic headaches. But the reason that this is something that's a personal issue, because not only affects myself, but there's thousands that have been affected. And this is where Burn Place 360 came into inception from personal experience with delaying and denial and seeking specialized healthcare. I mean, we exhausted our life savings when my state police job said one morning, you can't come back to work, you're missing too much work. We don't know what's wrong with you, you may be contagious. That was heart-wrenching for me, you know, having to lose my childhood career for answering the call, for keeping the oath to the American people, and coming back home to the shut door was very a painful season, not only my life, but the life of my wife and my family. And this is why Burn Place 360 came about. I remember my wife, before they sold me into the operating room there at Vanderbilt Hospital, she said, no matter the outcome, I'm going to fight for you, whatever the outcome is. And here 12 years later, we're still in this. We're still in this effort. I was in November of 2010, I was diagnosed with a constrictive bronchiolitis, peribronchial fibrosis with chronic inflammation. And here lately, it's been more challenging. I just got over COVID, so that was a painful start of a year here in January. With other issues that have surfaced here recently, I was like, one example, I was in the hospital in January for 5 days. Didn't know what's wrong with me. They said, it's your pancreas. We think it's failing. Didn't know what was wrong. But it's issues like that still remain unanswered. And here I took a note to go to war, to deploy. Within 30 days, I was in the sandbox. And here, 13 years later, I'm still struggling to receive specialized healthcare. As of now, I have over 400 medical visits since I've returned from deployment. And it's become very so consuming that at times, you know, the veterans give up because they get tired of waiting, and it's heartbreaking. I was sharing about there was I think 2 episodes in Grey's Anatomy when I was in the hospital, because when I talked to the doctor and I told him about burn pit exposure, what's a burn pit, and I explained to him, he goes, that sounds like Agent Orange. So I said, exactly. It's like, well, history repeats itself, and that's just what we don't want to do. We don't want it to repeat itself. But even the climate of make here change once they saw the Grey's Anatomy episode, they're like, wow, I had no idea. This is just here in our backyard that there's veterans suffering from these invisible wounds. And this is why our slogan with Burn Place 360 is the war that followed us home, because it's definitely, we thought it was over when we came home. And here we are years, you know, over a decade later, still in the fight. But the challenging issue as a dual role first responder has been a tremendous challenge as the reservists coming back home. And thankfully, the Army did a line of duty investigation, which they found that my issue was due to an instrumentality of war that came about from burn pits. So that's what actually helped my VA case. But I'm just one of thousands, and there's many out there that are still they're denied. Their claims are denied. But thankfully, the Army Reserve did their work, and they fulfilled their oath, and they took care of me in doing their work. But then I had to face my civilian employer, where they denied my job accommodation after I submitted I was willing to get out of uniform and to take an administrative position, and even that was denied. So it's been like the ripple effect, not only affected my military career, but my civilian career, and then it just affected everything else, my family, the finances, almost lost our home. It's been a very trying decade for us, for me and my family.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry to hear, Leroy, but thank you so much for being willing to share your experience and be an advocate on these issues. As you said, spreading the word and making sure that veterans and the greater community know where to go for help and how to proceed is so important. Rosie, I'd like to invite you to chime in to share what your experience was like as a military spouse. We know when a veteran serves, it's not just the veteran serving, but the entire family. And you are now leading this organization, Burn Pits 360, to raise awareness. Can you tell us what this journey has been like for you and why you got into this advocacy work?
Sure, Betsy, thank you. Yes, first of all, thank you to Senator Gillibrand, to the DAV, to Harvard Law, and a special thanks to John Stewart and John Field for taking up this issue and really leading alongside all of us. If it hadn't been for them, I think we wouldn't be having some of these panels and conversations on the issue. And they, again, they could have easily said, no, we've spent so many years on 9/11, go ahead and take this cross up yourself. But just special thanks to all of them for giving attention to such an important matter. I think what I'd like to say, being the co-founder of Burn Pits 360, I'd like to share a little bit about our mission real quick. Our mission is to educate, equip, and empower individuals affected by toxic exposure. And really our mission is to set a pathway to justice, through the advocacy, through the outreach, and our research efforts. And Burn Pits 360 really was just a result of many spouses, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, meeting through this online platform, right? And realizing that this issue the injustice was more than just, having sort of like traditionally you meet around a coffee table, right, to discuss these things that you're facing as military spouses or families. But this was a place where we all met online and instantly connected and realized like, wow, we all have this one thing in common. And it's the injustice of delay and deny. So realizing that, again, it was more than just a Facebook page, more than just a Facebook chat on Messenger, and realizing that we ourselves, these families, these citizen soldiers, reservists, active duty people, we're really going to have to, take it upon themselves to address it and go to Congress. I myself had no idea how a bill even worked to get passed. So really just took all the experience I learned through my 23 years at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And then just all those, qualities that you're instilled during your childhood, and really push that into creating this national platform to create a better understanding of the injustice of the denial of the right to life, like bottom line for us, right? If you're denying veterans specialized healthcare, if you're denying them the right to live by, implementing these measures where you may catch that cancer in time and all of these exams and issues could be detected. It was really that is why we're here today, is because these families, these individuals impacted decided, we're not going to sit back and just become the next Agent Orange. So here we are today. And just witnessing someone like my husband, being told that it's a somatoform disease, or that it is all in his head, or that it's an issue of anxiety, like that really, it affected me in a way that we had to turn this into something bigger.
Mm-hmm. And you've succeeded, right? You have built up that community and you've been leading a movement on these issues. As hard as it's been, really grateful for your leadership in advocating for change so that other families don't have to go through the same struggle that you went through. Right. Senator Gillibrand, could I bring you back into the conversation? Because we'd love to hear more from you about, on the legislative front, as Rosie is talking about, how to make change here. Can you tell us more about the presumptive benefits for warfighters exposed to burn pits act and why it's so needed?
Yep. So my bill, I'm leading with Senator Marco Rubio. So it's bipartisan in the Senate. And it's also bipartisan in the House. We have Congressman Ruiz and Congressman Fitzpatrick leading it there. It basically will remove the burden of proof from the veteran to provide enough evidence to establish a direct service connection between the health condition and the toxic exposure. The veteran would only have to submit documentation that they received a campaign medal associated with the global war on terror or with the Gulf War. And that'd be it. So once they show that they did the thing they're supposed to do, it'd be done. That's what presumption is. I think the bill is really needed because, as I mentioned before, the VA estimates that 3.5 million people were exposed to burn pits. And just as the examples we heard earlier, getting the right health care at the right time is essential to saving lives and protecting people. And these are benefits that they've already earned. So I think this would go a long way to getting that early healthcare treatment and to develop some expertise within the VA so they know how to catch these symptoms earlier and can treat veterans and service members appropriately.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator. Speaking of healthcare, I'd like to bring Dr. Szema into the conversation. Dr. Szema, you've studied the effects of toxic exposures and testified in Congress on these topics. Can you share with our audience what we know about the health effects of exposures to burn pits?
We know that humans need to breathe clean air. That's 21% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, no particles in it. When you burn in a burn pit, it's burning at a lower temperature than in an incinerator, and you create tons and tons more particles in the air. And then it depends on what you're actually burning. If you're burning plastic, you're releasing N-hexane, which is a neurotoxin. If you're lighting all the burn pits on fire with JP8, which is jet fuel, it contains benzene, which is a carcinogen. If you burn metals, you can inhale those metals. So among the biopsies that we've evaluated, we found burn particles in the lung biopsies of these soldiers. We found polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons for burn particles. Most recently, we've even detected the temperature, the highest temperature at which these metals were burned. And we know that they're in a 400C range as opposed to what you would get at a higher temperature with the cigarette. And, you know, in these particular soldiers, they were all non-smokers. So the fact that the metals are in the lungs and that the metals are oxidized also supports the concept that they inhaled burned metals. The metals also fixed to one another. We find titanium bound to iron in fixed mathematical ratios of 1:7. And our geology colleagues say this is rare in nature, meaning it's a man-made source or anthropogenic source. So in our mind, there's no question. I agree with Senator Gillibrand that, you know, the VA would be clearly evasive in denying that there's a link.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Szema. Shane, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. DAV has been a leader in advocating as it pertains to burn pits for many, many years. But DAV has also been advocating for veterans harmed by toxic exposures more generally, including fights over presumptive service connection for disabling conditions related to exposure to Agent Orange, for example. Can you tell us more about DAV's role in this fight and how you're protecting and assisting veterans who've been harmed by burn pits?
Absolutely, and thank you very much. And I really want to thank Harvard Law, Senator Gillibrand, Leroy and Rosie, so thank you so much for sharing your stories directly with us, and Dr. Sema as well. I was a DAV benefits advocate for over 20 years, providing direct assistance to veterans and their families with issues related to direct service connection or toxic exposures, whatever the type of condition really could be. And over all of those years, dealing with so many veterans, providing that assistance to get them the benefits they've earned, it really becomes clear that service connection is the gateway. It is the gateway that most veterans use to get access to all of the other benefits, to include healthcare. Now, direct service connection requires a current diagnosis of a condition, something in service that we can point to as an injury or event or an exposure, and then a medical link or a nexus. And as we've been discussing, that's not always the case. That's why veterans are getting denied, because there's gaps in information. When there are these gaps in information, we need the scientific evidence, as discussed, to fill in those gaps, to provide those presumptive conditions when they're so drastically needed, like right now. But the problem is, in many cases, it's taken way too long to establish presumptives. Mustard gas veterans, over 50 years for presumptives to be added for them to get benefits. Radiation exposed veterans, over 40 years. And as we've been talking about Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange, that fight continues to add additional diseases that have been scientifically linked. So it's over 30 years now since the first Persian Gulf, and we're into the current problems and conditions with burn pits. It's already too late, right? It's already too late to establish the presumptions. These are things that could and should have been done 10, 15, 20 years ago if we had everything put in place. While VA and the Secretary has the authority to grant the presumptives, when they don't, in many additional cases, that's why we need the presumptions. That's why DAV is a proud supporter. We testified in support of Senator Gillibrand's bill, the Warfighters Act, and we believe that's really an important part of this, because presumptions fill in the gaps so veterans don't have to overcome, as was mentioned by Rosie and Senator Gillibrand, things they can't prove. That's why presumptives are so important. And we're here to not only assist with representation, but to make sure we find a better process to put in place so future generations don't have to wait 50, 30, 20 years to get those benefits established.
Thank you so much, Shane. Such important points. In addition to the parallels to past fights for veterans around these other kinds of exposures, including Agent Orange, there are also parallels to first responders on 9/11 and the diseases and health effects that they experienced. Senator Gillibrand, you were a leader in making sure that 9/11 survivors got the health care that they deserved. What lessons do you take with you as you fight to protect service members who are now being exposed to burn pits?
The most important thing that we did in the 9/11 fight is that we told people stories. And I think that's exactly true for this. I think when you hear these outrageous stories of veterans being denied the healthcare they need, being given the runaround, being forced to hire lawyers and medical experts to advocate for them, it's an outrage. So I think the more we lift up their stories, veterans from every state going to see their senators, the quicker we'll get a vote on this and the quicker we will be able to pass it. It's the real stories that really matter, because they are heartbreaking and they do make you outraged. And it makes you realize how wrong the VA is and how unacceptable this current policy is. And it makes it very clear why it has to change.
Thank you so much, Senator. Leroy and Rosie, I know you shared a little bit about your experience in applying for VA benefits earlier. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about what you went through in trying to obtain benefits through the VA?
Yes, absolutely. Betsy, I know in 2010 when the Department of Public Safety, it said I couldn't go back to work, that I needed to come back with an answer. Well, I ended up at the War-Related Illness Injury Study Center in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 2010, and I was inpatient for approximately 4 days. And at the exit review with the medical providers, they said, "Well, you do have shortness of breath, but it's not what you think it is. It's maybe some type of asthma." And I remember when my wife said, "Well, I would like for you to do for my husband to have a lung biopsy," and of course they said, "Well, we can't do that. We are not able to do that at this facility." And that's how we ended up with Dr. Robert Miller, who was already studying soldiers who were deployed with the 101st Airborne Division. And there was approximately, at that time, almost 50 soldiers who had diagnosed and had lung biopsies. And I think 48 or 49 were positive for the constricted bronchiolitis. But that was a tremendous challenge. And that has been even why we're so passionate about this advocacy, because it's not only for myself, but the thousands. I remember we drove to San Antonio, August of 2010, and I mean, we were desperate. I needed an answer, because I told them, I don't want to lose my job. It was a very painful season, and I remember being at Brooke Army Medical Center, and to be told that I didn't qualify for care because I said, "You've been back too long." I said, "I only been back from deployment a little over a year." I said, "Well, you don't qualify for care. You're not an active duty. You're not an active duty soldier, and you don't." At that time, it was called the Stampede study, if I recall, that they were on toxic exposure. You don't qualify for that study, so you have to go elsewhere. And that's how we led to seeing Dr. Miller.
Right. And I think to touch a little bit on the claims side of it, which, Leroy's giving a little background of our experience in trying to access that true underlying diagnosis. It was a battle, and it's continued to be a battle, because we've had to sort of become our own claims specialist, advocate. And I know Senator Gillibrand touched on it, researcher, lawyer. John Stewart has touched on this issue so much, that unless you understand the claims process and the policies behind lung injury and things of that nature, it's really tough. When we did finally receive the constrictive bronchiolitis diagnosis, even then it was a challenge for Leroy to receive a compensable rate for that specific disease, because it was not listed in the Code of Federal Regulations. So that's one thing I recall so clearly, when we did receive the 0% after submitting the lung biopsy that showed fibrosis of the lungs, constrictive bronchiolitis. I was really in shock. And so I can imagine what that's been like for other families that have received that war lung injury diagnosis. It's the same thing for them. It's the same delay and deny tactic. It's the same bureaucracy. And I don't think that for veterans, it should be this hard. I know that it shouldn't be. And then for the survivors, right? For those that have succumbed to these injuries, just having to prove and create laws, right? To make sure that these specific diseases are acknowledged and compensated.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the thing that keeps coming to my mind is why? Why is this so hard? Why do we have to keep fighting these battles over and over? Why are Rosie and Leroy having to do this on their own? So I'd like to hear from all of the panelists about this question. Like, when we look back at history and we see the struggles we've been through before with Agent Orange and other toxic exposures, and thinking about reforming the claims process, what can we do to stop this from continuing to happen? What can we do to prevent other veterans and service members who are affected by this from having to go through the same struggle? Senator Gillibrand, I'd love to hear your perspective about why this keeps happening and what we can do to prevent it, and then bring the other panelists into the room, into the conversation to answer that question as well. Shane, would you mind opining on this question? What do you think from your perspective?
Well, we've been seeing it repeatedly for years, right? Ever since World War II up until now, actually since 1921, when they first started doing presumptives. Part of the problem with the whole process is there isn't one specific designed or created presumptive process that is applicable for all exposures, all disabilities. There's a lot of different ideas and things out there in current legislation that could help correct that. There's actually a piece of that also in the Warfighters Bill. From 2007 until now, VA has received over 13,000 claims just on burn pit conditions, and they've denied roughly 77% of them. So that really clearly shows the direct service connection route isn't working. We need the presumption. But again, it's been over 20 years since the first exposure in Afghanistan, and we still don't have other presumptions. Acknowledging the VA did establish 3 presumptives last August, and they are looking at additional conditions. But again, as I said earlier, it's almost too late. We need to have something in place with triggers. We need to have an idea of, once we know there's an exposure, let's establish that we're conceding that exposure. Then let's set up, we need to have the studies done. We need to find a way so that the minute we're identified of the exposure, they can start receiving easier ways for direct service connection for those conditions till the science catches up, and healthcare, and find additional ways to make sure we're not waiting 20 or 30 years when they already have science in a lot of these conditions, as was already noted. And just look at benzene. Benzene is a condition found in the air sampling tests that were done in 2008. Benzene is already an identified and known carcinogen. What more science and evidence do we need? And that's also part of this problem and why we're waiting too long.
Yeah. Dr. Szema, can you chime in from your perspective about the role that medical research plays here, and what kind of systems or processes we can put in place to ensure that we're not continuing to fight these fights in the same way in the future?
Our team has always advocated for an analogous system to the World Trade Center monitoring program, meaning that we believe that the best thing would be to have independent academic centers of excellence nationwide, reporting to Congress annually, and funded by the NIH in a peer-reviewed fashion, so that we could monitor, develop new drugs, test models, look at prognosis, et cetera. And the World Trade Center monitoring programs are an example of where there have been tens of thousands of papers. People have gotten healthcare, and we've learned a lot about certain exposures. And it is an analogous exposure to the burn pits. So that's one thing to advocate for more research, because drug development is costly, but important, because a drug to treat lung injury would have broad scientific applicability, not only for burn pits and for World Trade Center lung injury, but for other causes, for example, lung injury related to COVID.
Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit about the research you had done previously for first responders and folks affected at the World Trade Center. Can you share a little bit more about some of the parallels that you see in the research for these two groups?
Sure. Initially, in children who lived near the World Trade Center, we saw extremely high rates of asthma that increased post 9/11 in Manhattan's Chinatown. And that's similar to the increase in number of asthmatics that were detected right after 2004 to 2007. But longer term, because the World Trade Center, entailed 2 planes with jet fuel, which contained JP8, analogous to JP8 being burned in burn pits, we've seen similar issues with regard to some people are complaining of cancers, people that have inhalational lung injury or burned lung injury. So if you believe that people were sick after 9/11 because of exposure, and I do, then this is worse. This is way worse, because you live next to a burn pit daily for a deployment for a year, or for 2 deployments for 2 years. And it's complicated also by getting exposed to the sandstorms, which can carry the plumes, as well as improvised explosive devices, roadside bombs. So there are lots of airborne hazards in military theater, and it's way worse.
Thank you for sharing that. Rosie and Leroy, you have been out there, out front, advocating and building community with others who've been affected by these issues. What would your message be to our audience today about what they can do to support your efforts?
Betsy, I know that in just looking back and just one example how things parallel with 9/11. I had a first responder, NY, a New York firefighter, reach out, Joe McKay, about maybe 18 months ago regarding my cluster headaches and the ordeal that I went through. And when he heard about my story, and I mean, here I was being given the wrong medication. I was being treated for migraines and not until 2018, I mean, a decade later, after I had a Q-spec scan done of my brain, that they discovered that I had the toxic encephalopathy, the toxic brain injury, because it was, when you're being told, oh, maybe it's in your head. I mean, it's nerve-wracking for a person. I mean, here looking back, I mean, there was no reason that I wanted to lose my civilian career, especially my military career. But the one thing that I would emphasize is community awareness of local, to involve your local medical providers. And I mean, I just want to thank Dr. Szema, because here in January, he reached out to one of my specialists, because he was my local specialist, because I don't know what else to do. I'm not familiar with these type of exposures, but thankfully Dr. Szema was, has been approachable all these years and worked with us alongside with us, and he gave him some direction. But I encourage, for those that are experiencing issues that unexplained and you can get in the runaround, is to educate your local providers. I mean, that's what I do. Every time I meet a new specialist, I present the VA training letter. I take historical documents, and that's one thing that even with the Army and doing their line of duty investigation, that I did a lot of the legwork, because as an investigator, which was my part of my civilian career, I had to do a lot of the work myself in gathering the documentation to present the case. But others don't have the resources or the strength to do that because of their health. But I encourage, if you go on our website to Purpose 360 and go on support and resources, we have those letters uploaded where people can go on there and download those letters, documents. And I already knew that, before I left Iraq, they handed me a memo from Lieutenant Colonel Curtis. I remember they handed me a memo. So, sir, you might need this in the future. And I already knew. I said, this exposure here, this from burn pits is going to affect this. And sure enough, that's what happened. But community awareness of local providers is so important, so we can educate them, because they're going back again. In years back, we were traveling out of state just to receive that specialized healthcare. Mm-hmm. But eventually, we want to be able to educate the general community, the medical community.
Right. Just to piggyback off what Leroy said, first and foremost, don't give up. Most veterans that reach out to us that are impacted, many have communicated to us that their marriages are on the brink. They're ready. They're at that point of no return. Please, I can't emphasize enough, don't give up. I mean, there are resources out there. And like Leroy mentioned, and what I communicated to this veteran last night was like, unfortunately, you are going to have to be the one to educate your clinicians, your healthcare providers in the community, even at the VA, right? So our advice to those that are experiencing this delay and deny through the claims process, through the denial of specialized healthcare, is go to burnpit360.org, click the resources tab, or visit any of the other veterans organizations' websites that have these resources. On our website, we do have, that, like Leroy mentioned, the VA training letter that lists the dioxins. Thankfully, we have Dr. Szema, who sits on our scientific advisory board. They did a great job of taking those dioxins and then putting them on a toxic exposure table that highlights the health impacts. And it's like a 7-page document you can download and take it to your providers. There are resources out there. And so you just really, like Leroy mentioned, equip yourself, educate your community leaders and your healthcare providers. That's key, and it's important to get through this issue until VA and DOD do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Such an important message, Rosie. Don't give up. There are resources out there, ways you can educate your providers and move through this process. But Senator Gillibrand, part of the goal of your bill is to make this process easier. by establishing presumptions for veterans who are going through this process. What can folks in the audience who are interested in advocating on these issues, what can they do to help get your bill passed? What would you recommend?
Thank you. Well, interestingly, we have an opportunity coming up. The House will be considering a comprehensive piece of veterans legislation to address toxic exposure the week of February 28th. And that includes my entire bill on the presumption. So I think to the extent people are willing to share their stories over the next 2 weeks and really try to lift it up, tag the members of Congress who are on the bill, try to get your local press to cover your stories. It'll help create the momentum and the push to get that bill passed in the House.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I know we're coming up on the end of our hour together. I want to bring our other panelists back into the conversation, but also note if anyone in the audience has questions, encourage you to drop them in the Q&A section, and we will have some time to take questions from the
Serena?
audience.
Yep.
Hey, Dee, would you like to see a physician?
So Shane, any other recommendations you would have for audience members who are interested in finding ways to advocate on these issues?
Absolutely. First, if they need help, they can go to dav.org and find a DAV service officer in their area. But just to jump on what Senator Gillibrand mentioned, the Honoring Our Pact Act. This is a really comprehensive piece of legislation. Not only does it encompass her entire bill, it will also add hypertension as a presumptive disease for Agent Orange exposed veterans in Vietnam. It will expand radiation risk activities for veterans who participated in Inuit-Atoll and Palomar, Spain radiation cleanup. And it would expand Agent Orange exposure to all of Thailand military bases, Cambodia, Laos, Guam, America Samoa, and Johnston Atoll, and provide studies for toxic exposures at Fort McClellan and PFAS water contamination. So this is a monumental piece of legislation. Nothing this large has been submitted, and as the senator noted, it's pending. My advice, reach out to your member of the House of Representatives, your representative, reach out to them now. Let them know that you fully support and want them to put this on the floor of the vote. You want them to vote for it because this will make the difference everybody is seeking.
Thank you so much, Shane. So I just want to pause right now as we're coming up on the 3 o'clock hour. I know Senator Gillibrand needs to go on to other important duties, but just want to pause and thank all of our panelists and especially Senator Gillibrand for your strong advocacy on these important issues related to burn pit exposures. I know some of our panelists will be able to continue to stay on and answer questions from the audience. I just want to thank you, Senator, so much for joining us today and always shining a spotlight on the important issues facing our veterans and military family members.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for their extraordinary advocacy and service. And I want to thank all the veterans who are on this call for their unbelievable sacrifice to our country. And I'm so grateful for everything. Thank you all, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
So please continue putting your questions in the chat. We have a few extra minutes to entertain questions from folks in the audience. I'll also note a recording of this event will be posted on our website after the event, so you can share with others. One of the questions from the audience was relates to some of the comments that Senator Gillibrand made earlier about the cost of providing these benefits through presumptions. How should we as a society think about the costs of adding presumptive illnesses to the benefits that are provided by the VA? I'm curious for any of the panelists' perspectives on this, but maybe I'll start with Shane as we think about the cost of war and the cost of these presumptive benefits.
Thank you very much, Betsy. One of the problems that currently exists when we start trying to pass very large, comprehensive pieces of legislation, Congress has a rule they've imposed on themselves, the pay go. That means you must pay for new bills as you go. So CBO projects a cost, and then they take that money out of an existing veterans program to pay for it. So PAYGO basically says, veterans, in order to get new benefits, we're going to take existing benefits away. So my suggestion is just say no to PAYGO. I understand that they have it implemented to keep everybody in balance, but the reality is they're making projections. Let's say, for example, they're projecting 3.5 million veterans seeking assistance exposed to burn pits. The reality is it's not going to be 3.5 million coming in, but they'll take that 3.5 million veteran cost out of existing benefits, and it may or may not come to fruition. For example, Blue Water Navy, there was an estimate there was going to be over 450,000 claims of Blue Water Navy. So they offset that in order to pay for it. Problem is, there still hasn't been 100,000 Blue Water Navy claims yet, and it's been over 2 years. So PAYGO really has a limit. And so people get a little concerned, our members of Congress, about bumping up against it. Thing is, nobody asked us if we thought we needed to add more money to go to work. So why should we have to pay for it? Why do veterans have to pay for benefits on their own back? It's really what it comes down to. PAYGO should not apply to veterans benefits, period.
Mhm. Thank you. I really appreciate your perspective on that. There was a brief mention earlier about the burn pit registry, and I was interested to hear Rosie speak a little bit about your advocacy and work around creating and consolidating and collaborating on burn pit registries. Could you share some information about that?
Sure. So, initially the DAV had the actual first burn pit registry. They were keeping track and monitoring and just collecting data. And then we reached out to them, at the beginning of our advocacy to sort of, with permission to hand that baton over and continue, the awareness side of things. So what we did is we met with toxicologists and wonderful doctors and experts such as Dr. Szema, Dr. Miller, and just began collecting a series of questions and creating this database, right, where veterans can go and self-report. Either the family can go and submit a death entry, or the veteran themselves could submit self-report the health issues. So as a result of that, we were able to take that data to Congress and really push for the VA national registry. We didn't have any luck getting our own, senators or congressmen here in Texas, but that didn't matter. You had a group of families going to the Hill and saying, there's an issue, and if you're not convinced by these numbers and the data, then what more do we have to do? So it's been this, this fight of really trying to convince Congress to take up this issue. But the narrative has always been like, go build systemic momentum and then come back. So thankfully, we were part of that conversation with the VA. We were able to submit concerns and edits to the Defense Health Board during the process of how, when they were building the Airborne Hazards Open Burn Pit Registry. So it's been interesting, to say the least, that, there are things that we still don't agree with in regards to the registry. They don't track mortality. There's a lot of data that could be, shifted and reformatted. We've been doing it for over a decade, and we've collected entries for over 10,000 individuals to include mortality. Mm-hmm. So it's been the driving force, right, behind this issue, because we've been able to collect and analyze data and really push for that, legislation that's just so needed. And we know that because the veterans themselves are self-reporting.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. It's been a very important piece of this issue.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely share more information on our website. And I know there's a lot of good information on the Burn Pits 360 website about these registries and how to sign up. Dr. Szema, I'd like to ask you a question to bring in another perspective here. Thinking about different types of exposure. So acute exposure and chronic exposure. Acute exposure where there's a single or limited number of exposures to large quantities of chemicals or hazardous materials, whereas symptoms from acute exposures might be seen immediately following the exposure. Can you talk a little bit about the research in this area and questions around length and duration of exposure?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so when the World Trade Center cough situation first evolved, David Prezant from the fire department in New York classified it as something called RADS, or reactive airways dysfunction syndrome, because in the literature for a large, massive one-time exposure, the only thing that was there before World Trade Center was if a chlorine tanker on a train explodes and you have a cough thereafter, that was called RADS, or reactive airway dysfunction syndrome. So then he had to come up with a new terminology called World Trade Center cough. So yes, even one massive one-day exposure can lead to symptoms. Usually that'll resolve, not necessarily, but usually that'll resolve. The issue with burn pits is that even if you're only next to a burning mound of trash for a day, if it gets down your lungs, you just inhaled carcinogens. In the lung biopsies we see black particles. They're carbonaceous particles because it's burned soot. You look like a firefighter who was in a fire. And we know that even firefighters, when they go in fires, have risk of sarcoidosis, which increased dramatically in New York City fire departments, firefighters in the year after 9/11, and they have risks of cancer as well. So yes, long-term exposures are bad, but we also cannot discount short-term exposures.
Wow. It's amazing to see how dangerous these exposures really are, even in a short period. So as we're wrapping up, I would just invite our panelists, if there's any final words that you'd like to share with our audience. I'll start with Shane and then invite Dr. Szema and the Torreses to chime in with any final remarks that you'd like to make today.
Well, thank you very much, Betsy. This has been an amazing experience. Very fortunate to be a part of this, and just glad to continue fighting and pushing forward this issue. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that DAV's own Dan Clare, back in 2007, was the first organization to bring the burn pit issue to light. And as Rosie noted, then we started that first burn pit registry, which eventually led to the 2014 law creating the burn pit registry. So DAV has been locked in this fight for a very long time, as well as the other toxic exposures. And we're looking positive going forward. I think there's a lot of positive momentum that's being created. I think the Honoring Our Pact Act has a great chance of getting passed in the House. Again, contact your members of Congress, support the piece of legislation. And again, thank you all very much. If we can be of assistance, please reach out to dav.org. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shane. Rosie and Leroy, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you for the invite. I just want to say, piggyback off what Shane said. We've been in this fight for a long time, and it's always been about, helping save lives in any way we can. But most importantly here with the Honoring Our Pact Act, call your members of Congress. I can't emphasize enough, if there's, for those watching, you can create impact now by picking up the phone and holding your member of Congress accountable. Have them pass the Honoring Our Pact Act. And thank you again. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
Betsy, thank you again for having us, and just to be among with the Senator Gillibrand and the panelists has been indeed a tremendous honor. But one thing I do want to say that you know, you're your best advocate when there's an injustice, and for those that you may know that they follow my personal story, like my journey, even though I can't discuss details about the case, but I have a SCOTUS case pending, the U.S. Supreme Court. It's been this month marks 5 years that we filed a case through our county for a violation of USERA violation, where I was not accommodated. But there again, I did much of the legwork, because who else was going to stand in the gap for me, you know? And I remember in 2014, my sergeant major passed away, Sergeant Major Vela, and my last words over the phone, he said, "Sir, don't give up in this fight. What you're doing with the group, and you're going to be the voice for when we're no longer here." And it's those moments like that when I see the faces of the fallen, of those that have perished. You know, we just lost just a great advocate, Steph Sergeant Thompson, here a few weeks ago. I mean, we're at the congressional hearing back in 2018, in 2017, we were there together, and it's like time is of essence. So you're your best advocate. Don't give up. I mean, when it seems that the darkness falls, but you are your best advocate, and do not give up in the fight. Feel free to reach out. If there's that moment of the point of no return, feel free to reach out and ask for help. But just know that you're not alone in this fight, and we're going to continue. The wheels will continue to turn, and we're going to continue to push for justice on the issue.
Thank you so much, Leroy. You are such an incredible advocate, and just want to say thank you for your service and your sacrifice, for both you and Rosie for stepping up to lead on these issues and to build community, and let others know that they're not alone, and that they are fighting as part of a movement. Dr. Szema, any final words, final thoughts?
Our team thanks all the veterans for their service, and Betsy, Kat, and Professor Nagin, we thank you and the DAV for all the great work you did. And it was fantastic to be a participant in today's session. And you know, we're hopeful for all the upcoming legislation.
Thank you so much. It was really an honor to work with all of you on this panel. Thank you to our amazing expert panelists today. Thank you so much to Senator Gillibrand for joining us. Thank you to all of the veterans in the audience and advocates who are joining us today. Please check out the link in the chat to be able to view more information, and a recording of this event will be posted soon. Thank you so much for attending today. Wish everyone a nice afternoon.